All right. So let me pull up. I just have a handful of questions for you, even though in reality I could talk to you. I probably have 100 questions, but I narrowed it down to like six.
Well, you know what? I am here. I am good for a little bit. So, if you have more than six, we can get into those too. It's nice to talk to you. We've emailed many times before, but I don't know if we've ever had a conversation
Yeah,
like
no,
this.
I guess I'll introduce our background to my audience or so yeah, so how I know you, even though we've never met even virtually really before, is you were the editor for my comic series, It Eats What Feeds It, and sort of in that run, you became the co-publisher of Scout Comics, and you're now super active in the indie comic scene, especially in the creator owned crowd. And you seem to be like really paving the way, leading the way for a lot of the people on Kickstarter and kind of a mentor, at least on Twitter. I try to follow you more often than I really have time to spend, but I try to like dive in and like see whatever you got going on, which is how I came to here and wanted to reach out to you because I guess before we get into comics, I want to know like what is your background in the film industry, and like how did you get involved in the writer's strike, and and then we'll dive into like what was the writer's strike and all that. But we'll start off just like refresh me on your whole background and how you got started in this whole entertainment world.
Sure. So, I mean, like for anyone who's watching this, I'm Charlie Stickney. Right now, I'm the writer of comics like White Ash, Glarian, The Game. And In a previous lifetime, I was co-publisher over at Scout Comics. But in a previous lifetime before that, I had that little place in college where it was, do I want to go into comics or do I want to go into film and television? And so I interned at Marvel while I was in college, which was a wonderful experience. And But shortly before I graduated, I got a job offer in Los Angeles, which ended up bringing me out here to LA. And so I worked in the film and television industry for about 20 years. I worked in animation. I did a lot of kids animation for a while. I was a showrunner on a show called Horrible Histories, which was this adaptation of a Terry Deary book working with Scholastic. And then from there, I kind of transitioned into independent film, where I was writing films, trying to get them set up, had a couple of films that were almost made. I had a couple of feature films that were set up that were almost made. And this is kind of, if you're looking to be a writer in Hollywood, if you are doing features, this is the reality for a lot of working writers. You make a lot of money, but no one ever sees what you make. And so I had been doing that for a long time. And Then my son was born. And When you have kids, it can kind of change your life and how much free time you have. And I stepped back from the entertainment industry for just a little bit. And in that time, there was a huge transition because when I was coming up, not a lot of writers wanted to do television because television was seen as the place that was only doing standard network fare. Law and Order. Like I love me some Law and Order, but like that's not the kind of show that got my creative juices flowing. Like I wanted to do. I liked romantic comedies. I liked writing these big genre blockbusters, and but around like 2007 to 2011, there was this huge transition that happened where all of a sudden some of the best stuff started being made on television. And so when I came back to the industry, I was kind of looking at like this crossroad and like the movies that I wanted to make, the movies that I'd been hired to write drafts that never got made for was rapidly dwindling. It was basically these gigantic blockbusters, or Steven Spielberg made what he wanted, and there wasn't really that independent film scene anymore that I had been a part of for a long time. I produced a documentary at one point on ragtime piano playing, and so like I've done a lot of different things, but I realized those things were no longer a way that I was going to be able to financially support myself or artistically fulfill myself. And so I started looking at television as a transition. And I mean, when we go back to like the WGA strike, at this point, I already was a WGA writer because of the time that I had spent, working as a screenwriter. But it's a hard transition. It's different people, it's different organizations, it's different contacts that you have to have. And I was running up against a little bit of a brick wall. And for me to break into TV, and in the same way that I've sort of been in with feature film, I really needed to sell a pilot, and and then have my show going, and then be on some part of like the productions, either as a producer or as a showrunner, and that's hard. It's really hard to sell a pilot and get your show made when you don't have um, a track record in television. And so as I was kind of running into this, and you know, one of the wonderful things about comics is you write something and you can get it made and you can get it out to people who see it. But with film, a lot of these spec scripts that you'll write are read by 25 development executives at best, maybe 50. If it goes really wide around the town, it's like 75 people. And then if no one picks it up, it's dead. And as for something you might have spent half a year crafting as a writer, it kills a little piece of you every time that happens. And so I was starting to hit this place with television. And then the other refrain that I kept hearing was, well, this is good, but if it was based on something, we might be interested in doing something with it. And I said at some point, I was like, why am I doing this when I also have this great love for comics? And that, maybe I should just make the things that, that the studios are looking for. And then maybe we can have that conversation down the road. And so, because I had all these contacts from animation, it was easy for me to transition into comics and find artists. And so I started creating White Ash. And the first place that I went with White Ash was to Kickstarter. And this goes back to, I think some of the conversation that we can have later on was, I took a look, and this was 2016, at the comic industry, and I was looking at what creator-owned deals were like. I was looking at what the numbers were like in the direct market then. And while they were much better than they are now, the reality that was presented to me at the time was that it was going to be very hard to do a sustainable series in the direct market. And that the number of creators who get to do that it's very small, and it's usually the same 4 or 5 people, especially if it's a creator-owned series. And Kickstarter was just emerging as a space back in 2016, as a space that people did legitimate comics. It had been kind of the Wild West before that. And so I put White Ash out there. It did well. It started taking off. We started building a really good following. And somewhere in this journey of building up a pretty good brand on Kickstarter, Scout Comics approached me and they said, we'd love to put out your comic. And so basically what happened was, like, they picked me up as a creator. I started having conversations behind the scenes with them about how they did this and that. And they said, maybe you should come on board more and help with some of these things. Maybe you can be an editor on one of our books too. And I was like, sure, why not? I'm happy to help other creators. And so I started doing that. And then all of a sudden, Jim Pruitt was leaving the company. And so they said, would you be interested in maybe taking Jim's position? And I said, I don't know if I have the full bandwidth for that. And they said, well, we're also talking to David Byrne about doing that. I was like, I love David. He's really smart. Let's, we could do this together. So that kind of became the evolution. And so then David and I helped run Scout Comics for about 2.5 years. But, during all of this, the comic industry was going through such crazy changes. And anyone who's coming to comics now, who has been in comics, knows it's a really hard time for creator-owned books. And I even while I was at Scout, I kind of never gave up that other identity as a creator on Kickstarter, because that was so important for me, was the empowerment that Kickstarter gives people and the ability to sort of create things on their own and on their own terms. And at some point, I was kind of weighing the pros and cons, and like, I can do a lot more in that space. I can be a lot more helpful for other creators. What am I giving up if I leave Scout? And it was really like, I'm giving up the direct market. Well, the direct market's not supporting independent creator-owned books, to any real extent anymore. So, it was one of those, do I want to keep trying to be a square peg in a round hole? Or do I want to go to this place where there's a hole that fits me like a glove? And that sounded a lot dirtier than I intended it. But there's this place that, that I could thrive, that I knew what I did was a top 10 brand in that space, where I could hopefully help other creators do well there. So for me, I did a little soul searching. I was like, I should go just do this. This is where I want to be with my books. And then hopefully I can help other creators do well in Kickstarter, in crowdfunding, because there's a lot of different emerging direct to consumer platforms right now. And so yeah, so I transitioned back there, and I'm very fortunate. I have a very large fan base. They support what I do, and yeah, and so that's, I mean, I do a lot of crowdfunding of comics now, and I'm still a writer, of, WGA writer, and so who knows, like there may be some adaptation of some of the things that I'm doing in the comic space to other media down the road. But for right now, I'm just loving being part of the comic scene and helping people as much as I can with their books.
Gotcha. Great wrap up. Yeah, that's interesting because from my perspective, it was kind of the opposite in the sense that I had my first glimpse of success in the direct market with It Eats What Feeds It, which was
Sure.
essentially my debut, although I had had a webtoon before that. And so I've gone further in that direction, sort of trying to show, especially those that are new to the scene nowadays that don't know the difference between the Kickstarter space and the direct market space. And like you discovered before I had ever entered this, the direct market does not necessarily bring in the revenue that can sustain a creator owned series unless you hit really high number. Like you have to be a top 10% book to even break even with professional artists. So it's perfect that, so because there's people like you that are in the Kickstarter space, I've sort of niched out my own kind of realm and those that are trying to break in to find, indie house publishers to, if they're going to break in the door that way, how to go about things and actually not be blindsided when you finally get that first paycheck 12 months after you've, you know, put your heart and soul into something and then realize, oh, I not only did I not make it break even, I didn't make anything at all.
Right, and it's really hard, and I think the direct market now in particular has gotten really rough, and a lot of stores they're also trying to figure out what the landscape is, because the direct market got flooded by too many comics, too many publishers that were coming in whose mandate was not necessarily comics. Their mandate was creating intellectual property that they could try to sell to other markets, and they
Hmm.
had big funding behind them. And so their funding was sustaining their publishing model, as opposed to their publishing sustaining their publishing model, which enabled them to put out more product than the market could bear. And so the stores didn't really kind of understand that. They just saw all these new books coming in and like, oh, what's the hot one? And so a lot of stores overextended themselves trying to buy all these books that there wasn't a market for. And so now we're going through this time where the stores are like, hold on, we don't want all of that. And they are pulling back. They're making sure they're only ordering books for to pull for their customers, which means if a customer walks into their store and says, I see this book in previews, this looks great, that's the only way they'll order it, depending on the publisher. And so, again, it's a really hard time. I think we're going to go through some contraction. We're going to see some publishers maybe going away, which is too bad. But the market needs it. There's probably too much stuff out there, and that's making it harder for creators to make money. The ones who are putting the comic out, that the person who's walking into a shop with $30, to spend that week is now looking at 50 new books versus 10, right? And those dollars don't go as far. And so not as many creators are getting those dollars. And the same thing goes with a publisher that's putting out 25, 30 independent books per month. Marvel can do that, but
Hmm.
there are other publishers that should not be putting out 20 plus titles a month.
That's
So,
what I showcase, is that every section and subsection of this industry, all the eyeballs and money flow to the top of the pyramid. So the top, few publishers within a space, and then the top few creators within that space. It's so the rest of us are all fighting for the tail end of everything. Um, do
well, and
you
I think it's
know
like, go ahead.
I was where was the success being had in sort of the on the back end with these publishers that were getting properties turned into films and TV? Like what, or do you know like what caused them to think that that was going to be sustainable? Were we just in like a what they call like a bull market or something like that? And do you know like
There's definitely
what changed to where it just suddenly started to fall all off?
so there's a couple of things that happened. But if you look at what the genesis for it was, is like people have always looked at comics as maybe potential sources of IP. But when the Avengers hit big and it changed, and the MCU was then this multi-billion-dollar franchise, a lot of people came into it and were trying to, um, deconstruct it from the top down. How do I do that? Okay, what I need is I need a publishing company that I own. And so here's where, the really sad thing, and this also ties into the film industry, is you had all these tech firms and venture capitalist funds that came in who aren't necessarily people who cared about making comics. They're not even thinking people who cared about making movies. These are people who cared about making money. And they saw that potential, giant pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And so they started, we had a lot of people who were smart, who had been in the comic industry, who courted these people and said, hey, if you give us a $5 million round of funding, we can get out X number of properties. And then they would have a first round and a second round of seeding and things like that. And so there were companies that were built on that model, where their model was never to be sustainable based on the books they sold. It was only on the backs of, what they were able to do with the secondary life of these books.
So it's almost
And
like before the companies even went live as a publisher, they had funding based upon sort of non-existent sales and almost
yes,
like pre-sales.
100%. They they
Okay.
they they had they had millions of dollars in funding based on a business plan that was going to deliver IP to studios. And this is, and what happened was, um, not a lot of these things took off. Like when you're looking for the one that turned into a movie that justifies all of this. Basically, what happened was there was no one that
Yeah.
justified all of this. This was all speculative, and I won't say the names of the companies, but if you look at the companies that have a lot of the comic companies that have sprung up in the last 10 years are all companies that are based on this model. And if you find out where their funding comes from, a lot of them, that's where it came from. And then if you look like at a big company, and I can talk about IDW because they're a publicly traded company, like that's another company that a large part of their losses, and one of the reasons why they've been having issues, is because the IP side of things has not been going very well, right? And that's
Mhm.
where, like they were leveraging a lot of their investment, and their dollars were all based on what they were going to do with the IP side of things. Um, but if you look at other companies who filed for bankruptcy recently or things like that, these are companies that had huge rounds of funding based on what people call the maybe movie model. And for me personally, like obviously you want that to be part of your company's business model, but a publisher needs to be sustainable based on the books they put out. At some point, you need to have that breaking point. And obviously it's hard right out of the gate to be a publisher that's sustainable, but you have to have it. Okay, the first year is going to be a sunk cost year where we're just getting things up and running. But in year 2 or year 3, we're eventually going to reach that point where we have a sustainable model based on the library we've put together, the back issues that we're selling, the trades we have on the shelf, because that's how publishing works, right? It's a long tail industry. It's an
Mhm.
industry which is based on building a library that will sell over 20 years, so you can take chances on things now. But these publishers were taking chances on 50 books, not just one, right? And because they were looking at all this is like 50 lottery tickets, and one of them's got to take off. So during the pandemic, we had a big boom in the comic industry for a while, and the collectors' money was coming in, and the numbers were going through the roof, which was wonderful. And I think your book also benefited from that because you came out at just the right time. That's not to
I
say it's not a great book, but it was like
I
also
did
like,
I got lucky in that and that I rode that wave essentially.
yeah. So like it was both a good book, a beautiful looking book, and it came out at the right time, and boom. Um, but after that bubble started to burst a little bit and interest rates were as they were, the people who had put in all that VC money were looking for a return on their investment that wasn't there. And so, rather than going to a third round of funding, they said, yeah, we're good. Let's see what happens. And there's a couple of these companies that were living like there was, that tomorrow wasn't coming, that they never had to kind of stand on their own 2 feet. And so now there's a lot of scrambling from those companies. But again, it created a marketplace with all this content and all this product that was not being sustained by the buying habits of consumers. And usually when you look at a marketplace, right, there's a balance between what people will buy and what you can sell. And all this stuff was being created out of balance. And so now we're going through this time where where the balance is coming back into play. And so that's, to me, what's happened to the comic industry in a nutshell. And it's also the same thing that happened in streaming. And it happened in the television industry. It's very similar, where the business model of streaming is not a sustainable entity. And the problem was, Netflix was doing it and they were selling their investors a bill of goods. And because Netflix was doing it, all these other companies invested in streaming. And so they put all of their money and all of their assets in building these streaming pipelines. But the problem was, television used to be one of the most lucrative models of revenue for any studio or production company, because you could take your costs and offset them by advertising. They would have these sales called the upfronts at the beginning of every year, where they could say, okay, this show costs $1 million an episode. We can probably sell $1 million in advertising if it's Seinfeld or whatever it is, like what's one of the hits. So this show is costing us nothing to make. And then when we get to the back end and we sell into syndication to all of these different little satellite television stations across the country, we'll make billions, right? And so it was a very sustainable marketplace. And at worst case, you might only be losing a little bit of money because, again, you had the advertising revenue to offset it. Streaming was based on this subscription model, but the subscription numbers don't come close to offsetting the cost of what it costs to make these content, because you have like a churn and burn model where the Netflix or whoever needs to keep pumping out new shows to keep bringing in new subscribers, because their real revenue stream is coming from new investors pumping money into the company and their stock price is going up. And that's what they've been continuing doing. So all of that comes back down to streaming is not sustainable based on the content that's being produced. It's the same kind of problem, is you have this content that costs more than the market is bearing. There's not enough people who are subscribing to these channels to pay for the content. So you have to find ways to inflate the stock to pay for it. And we're facing that same contraction, that same kind of crash in the streaming industry. And what you're going to see going forward, and for those of us who like being able to stream our favorite show, it's going to be really painful, because they're bringing all commercials back. Like commercials are coming back to streaming because, oh, that's how we have to pay for it. And, or you're going to pay a premium not to have those commercials. So those people who are used to being able to get their $19.99 Netflix subscription are now going to pay $30 to get it without commercials. And all of a sudden you're going to be wishing for cable and wishing to be able to TiVo it and fast forward through those commercials, but that's all been gone,
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You answered a lot of my questions just with that.
And then I'll say, like when you go with the writer's strike, one of the core elements of this strike goes back to that transition, right? When in 2007, which was the last time there was a writer's strike, and I was in that strike as well, streaming was just emerging. And the studios didn't want to pay writers for it at all. They said to the writers, this was like in 2007, and I don't know if you remember this, if you were probably watching TV in 2007, but basically what all the broadcast networks started doing was, the day after something aired on the network, on abc.com, you could see that episode, and it would be there for like 2 or 3 weeks. And it was their way, as they said at the time, of just advertising the main series to get more eyes to go back to broadcast. So like, look, we can't even pay for this. This is just advertising costs, so you shouldn't get a piece of it. And the writers in 2007 were like, no. like this is the future. We're going to do this. And the studios were like, that's crazy. It's not going to be the future again. It's not anything we're ever going to make money on. So we don't want to even like, we don't even need to put it in your deal in 2007. We won't, let's write a line in that we'll agree to look at it in the next contract, which is up in 2010, that says we'll address this thing if streaming actually becomes something. And, like there were enough of us who were young enough to see the technology coming and could see that this was going to be a groundbreaking thing for the industry. And that's why the strike happened in 2007. Unfortunately, in 2007, there were plenty of people who were older, who were running the Writers Guild, who didn't really think it was as big of a deal as the younger writers were saying. And people in the other industries, like in SAG and the Directors Guild, didn't think this streaming thing was going to be that much of an issue. And so basically, the writers in 2007 settled for a deal that was okay. It was something, but it wasn't anywhere near to what you got for cable residuals, and it wasn't anything like broadcast. So basically, it was pennies on the dollar of broadcast, but at least there were pennies. So you flash forward to now, to this contract, and the entire industry is now streaming, right? Like it's the most important thing. So, but the difference is like on a cable network show, or I say a cable show. So let's say you're writing, what's a popular? You're writing like SVU, like one of the SVU shows or whatever it is, right? So as a writer, if it's on say ABC, and, episode comes out, you got paid to write that episode. When the episode airs again, you get half your fee again. And for a script writer, that might be another $20,000, right? The next time it airs, you get a quarter of it. And there's a declining residual system where if it got played 10 times, you might make another $150,000, right? Which is good money. But if it's only like one of the things that you're doing during the year, it's great money, but it's not like life-changing money.
Yeah.
Now, if that show is streaming, you would get a buyout fee that might be $500. Right? So rather than making $100,000, 1 million people could stream it and you'd get 500. And so like that's the economic reality that had shifted. So this time Outriders were like, no, we're not going to continue to take incremental change to the system that was unfair to begin with, now that it's the basis for the industry. And so like that was like one of the big bones of contention for the strike was we need to have residuals that are based, if a show gets viewed by 1 million people, we should get paid more than if the show was viewed by 6. And like that system was not set up like that. So like it was shifting things in that direction. And then the other thing was AI coming in as a component, and the studios were again like, nah, we don't even need to talk about it. It's like let's push that down the road for
It's
3
gonna
years from
exact repeat of the last time.
Yeah, except this time, all of those of us who were in our mid-20s to early 30s are now in our 40s and 50s, and we're the voices in the guild that have some weight, and we're like, nope, fool me once, shame on you.
Yeah.
Right? Like no, we're not letting that. And so that and plus, and then we also had SAG joining in, which made a huge difference. So all of these things were some of the most. It was like, how do we get residuals so we can start earning, basic living, like living costs for LA again? How can we sort of safeguard the future with AI? And so like those were the two most important things.
So what was the outcome? Was it success? Are the writers happy with how it turned out?
Well,
it is done, right?
yes. So the writer's strike is done. The actor's strike is not.
Okay.
So first of all, like the studios are horrible. Like
I could tell by the reading your threads. I was like, I should have known.
like one day, that said, there are plenty of good people who work at studios, and I would be very happy to have my shows set up at a studio. The negotiations were pretty horrible, though. I mean, all of this negotiating could have been done in April, right before the contracts were up, but the studios didn't want to negotiate for real. They had an offer. The writers didn't take it. They made the writers wait over 100 days before they decided to come back to the table. And every day the writer's like, hey, we're not going to work, but we're happy to talk anytime. And so the studios waited over 100 days before they came back to start negotiations again. which again is horrible because it's 3 months. And it's not just the writers who aren't working. It's now like the shows are being shut down because then the actors walked off. So there's all the people who are the grips and the camera people and the craft services. It just shut down an entire industry. And so many people are out of work, losing houses, losing money because the studios don't want to talk. Um, all that said, the deal that that the writers were able to get, I personally think was a fantastic deal. It addressed so many different areas. It addressed all the key positions that the writers were hoping for. I mean, you never get everything. I mean, and you should never expect to get everything, right? You ask for the moon and hope you can get halfway there. The
Yeah.
problem is like that, before they weren't willing to get 10 feet off the ground. Like there was no halfway. And so I think it was a monumental improvement over where we started. And it laid the foundation so all of these things can be expanded upon. But if you don't lay a foundation, it becomes very easy for the next negotiation to come around and the studios to say, well, you had your chance to address that before. We're not going to get into that this time. Versus we have a residual established here. We'd like more of it, right? It's like those are two very different conversations, whether
Yeah.
you should get something, whether you should get a little more of the thing that you're getting. So,
Nice. Yeah, I didn't really dive deep into movies until 2020. Great timing. And just within those, like that time period to now, uh, it's as if everything's changed even more because whenever I had finished a movie in 2019 and I was getting the like last little bit of foreign like TV deals where one little company in one small country was like, we'll give you 3 grand to play your film for 1 year. And then I'll simultaneously go to a big company streaming and they'll be like, we'll give you $900 for life rights worldwide.
right.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, this, what possibly, I have asked around so many people and it's like, what do they think? Where do they think us filmmakers will make the money from if that's all they can offer up front? Like that's I'm giving you everything for one extremely mind-bogglingly low price, and then I might get DVD sales that don't, so that's what I found now is I almost have to go boutique with everything and be very old school and offer things as a unique package, almost a film like a collectible, and have special unique events to showcase them and sell them as a DVD with these series of things and have a comic book along with it. It's wild. So it's
Yeah.
and
And
I don't know. Yeah, just
with the film industry, there's also a couple of places which host screening events, and you have to almost think of your film as like a concert, right?
yeah,
You're the singer who created the album, and now you have to go on tour with it.
exactly. Yeah, that's how I describe how I'm doing it, and it's the only way I even really can make sense to how to go about it. Unless you were to able to book or some deal before you even fund the film or start the film, but I'll now switch back into the Kickstarter gears.
Sure.
Um, just to what what did you do if you could like narrow down like basically 3 things? You can tell me more or less. What did you do to sort of build your following on Kickstarter aside from create a quality comic? Did you regularly post on Twitter? Did you go into groups? What do you think was one of the key factors that allowed you to sort of be one of the leaders of that space?
Well, so I think the first thing that you said, I think is a key, is the quality comic. And I think you have to have, if you want to build a following, some of it comes down to branding. I think branding is very important. I hate to sort of talk about writing and distill it into your brand,
I
but
talk about it.
you as a creator have to have a brand, and that doesn't necessarily mean the kind of things that you write. And so you have your brand, you have the brand of what you do, and it's all wrapped up together. And I worked with some excellent artists. You have too. So I think like that's part of your packaging. But from the very beginning, when I came to Kickstarter, I said, you know what, if I'm going to do this, and I had worked in animation, it's like when you put together pitch packages, there is a little bit of that. If it looks good, maybe it is good. And so people are like, oh, this is snazzy. Like they already have this expectation that this is something impressive. And
Mm.
so, I started from the very beginning with my very first campaign, trying to present everything as like a high-end experience. So what you were getting on Kickstarter was not just a comic book. It was an experience. It was like, and I don't want to quite use this example because not comparing myself to Apple, but when you open an Apple product for a long time, like just even the box opening was an experience, right? And I don't know if you've had any Apple products or the laptops or the computers, but
I know exactly what you're
everything,
talking about. Yeah.
it's designed so when you get it, even before you start the computer up, you're like, ooh, I made the right choice. This is something special.
Hmm.
Like I see where my extra money went. And, for me, I knew Kickstarter comics were a little bit expensive. And so I wanted everything to be part of that presentation. And so like there was my branding. I started advertising early on what my packaging was going to be like. Like you see that a lot in Kickstarter now. It's sent in these Gemini mailers, et cetera, et cetera. That was not something people did. I'm not saying I started it, but I was one of the first people to be like, hey, we're mailing this in stay fat packaging. Your book is not going to be damaged. And when people would get the books, like sometimes they were closed with this like sticker that said made in white ash. It all felt like this high-end experience from the beginning. And then
Hmm.
they opened the book, it was on heavier paper. I was not trying to print it as cheaply as possible. And so they picked it up and said, oh, this is a real thing. This is from a real company. So it felt from the get-go like it was something not necessarily as good at the direct market, but something that was a higher quality product. Like I wanted people to feel like what they got from Kickstarter was something special. Um, so like that was part of what I was doing. In terms of branding, I've always been someone who likes to help other creators. I've had a long journey in the entertainment industry. And so being able to sort of give back has been part of my brand. And, it's worked for me because it's a natural extension of who I am. And I'm not going to say I haven't leaned into that a little bit, but I think, when you're doing branding and when you're doing something, it's those things that you do well. And so being able to sort of package, okay, here's this premium product, and I'm this creator that you want to believe in because I'm also here to give back to other people, which I am. Like it made you feel good about the product. It made you feel good about the person that was doing the thing. And then I created a book that, beside it being good, had really solid cliffhangers that made people want to sort of read the next issue. I stayed in communication, and there was a little bit of wash, rinse, and repeat. Like here's a great one. Oh my God, it has this big cliffhanger. When's the next one coming? Oh, he's back on Kickstarter, and I like this guy. And here's the book. Yeah, and so I watched the audience build up very quickly because of that.
Did you do them all one at a time, starting with White Ash? Did you crowdfund issue one, then issue two, then issue three?
Yes.
And did you rely on those funds to actually finish the book, or did you front the costs and then essentially recoup your investment through the Kickstarter?
Well, there's a little bit of a journey to that, but basically before the first one, when I talked to my wife, we're having this talk about me doing this crazy thing, and we agreed upon a number that we could invest. And so I invested some money in the first Wide Ash, and then it did well enough on Kickstarter that from that point on, I haven't had to invest our personal funds. It's been more the comic that's been sustaining itself and continuing to sustain, everything that we do.
Gotcha. So you
Uh,
you did it right down the line perfectly to where you invested in the first one and you've just continuously been using the profits from each one to fund the
yeah,
next one. And now
like
you're now at, so White Ash was a full, at least one volume, right? Or was it two? And then now you're at Galarian number three, which is live right now. So you essentially have three graphic novels?
well, no, so these were just they were single issues. So the first White Ash was a 52-page single
That's
issue.
right. Yeah, I forgot. It was
Yeah,
longer than your typical
yeah.
floppy
I
or
went
whatever.
I went 52, then I went 32, then I went think 32, then 40. Then I did a hardcover trade that collected those, that I had an
Okay.
extra story in the back. And that's kind of where I transitioned to Scout. But then when I went back to Kickstarter, I did another 44-page issue of White Ash, and then I did a 64-page issue. So like everything that I do is also like a premium size.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Um,
you go premium all the way with even you release the metal stuff
yeah.
and exclusive and the plates, which reminds me, who do you use the same printer or do you have a personal relationship with someone or do you use someone like that we all use, like Comic Wellsprings? Like who do you use to print your stuff?
So it depends. I mean, there's been an evolution over time. I mean, I had the fortunate position of being at Scout, so we talked to some printers there. I've used some bad printers that aren't around anymore. When I first started, there was a company called Kraken Print that
I
went out
remember
of
them.
business, and
Yeah.
they took a lot of people's money with them. I've used Mixam. I've used Comic. No, I haven't. I don't know if I've used Comic Wellspring, because the thing about Comic Wellspring is they don't really do the same price breaks. And whenever I'm printing 2,000 or more copies of a book.
Yeah.
Because I look at this, and I have since the very beginning, like I'm a publisher, I'm trying to make the money in the long tail. So if I have to invest a little bit more now, down the road it'll pay off.
That's
So when
what
I did the
I have seen. I'm always shocked when people don't go that route. It's like, why spend so much to print 50 comics when you can print 1,000 and go to do, at least 3, 4 Comic Cons a year? Yeah, have a little bit of a long-term, span. 3 years, it's not that crazy to try and move 1,000, especially if you are really expecting to turn, like you said, if you're really trying to build a brand and do this the right way as a publisher, it seems strange to just go such short term. Like, well, I found 40 people, so I'll print 50.
well, and I think that's it comes down to two things. One, creators are kind of cashing out a little bit too early. Like they had this Kickstarter and I raised $3,000 and I only needed 2,500 for the print. So I've got 500. I'm going to use that and I'm going to spend it on video games or whatever, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to take that extra 500 and rather than printing, like you said, you know, 200 copies or 150 copies, I'm going to get an offset print run. And maybe I put in an extra 500 bucks of my own. And now I have 2,000 copies or 1,000 copies that over time I will make a lot more money.
Yeah.
And so like that's kind of the approach I've taken from the beginning. And because I'm doing a lot of serializing where I will do 1, 2, and 3, like right now, I'm selling, for this Glaring campaign, which is 1 through 3, people are can pick up a collector's pack or a catch-up pack that has 1 through 3, right? All the issue 2s were paid for when I did the issue 2 campaign. That was a campaign that was profitable upon it, onto itself. We made some money on it. Everyone got paid really well. But I was also able to print enough so we have enough in the bank that I can use those issue 2s going forward into a multitude of campaigns until we get to a point where we can collect all the Galarians together. And that's kind of like the Goldilocks amount. You want to
Mhm.
have enough that will last you. So by the time you're ready to collect the trade, you're just running out of those issues.
So you're actually running your brand as a business. That that's the key there. If I were to summarize, it's like from the get-go, you knew that you yourself are a business with brands and you're going to go high quality all the way with a long-term approach and you're going to do it not necessarily the right way, but the logistical way, I guess you could say. Trial and error and work with what works, do some proper accounting.
100%. Like I had a business plan where my goal was to be breaking even by the third Kickstarter we did. Like that was like, okay, and then I'll overprint here, we'll do this, we'll have these tiers. And so I had that long-term approach before I even launched the first issue.
Yeah, yeah. Man, I think I am about at my limit, and I know you have other engagements, so I'll wrap up with a final, just tell me as if I don't know, what is your brand? What is White Ash? What is Galarian? And pitch my crowd.
All right, so White Ash is ground. I do a lot of grounded fantasy. White Ash, think Romeo and Juliet meets Lord of the Rings in rural Pennsylvania. So modern day fantasy set in coal mining country. Glarian, which is live right now, It tells the origin story of the world's most dangerous elf, but it's told through the eyes of a young woman in 1970s New York who's having visions of being this elf warrior from 3,000 years ago. And then over the course of the series, those two stories are going to come together. You're going to see how those women are connected, and it's also going to pay off a piece of the past of White Ash, because it's all part of one giant interconnected universe.
Bravo. Thanks a lot, Charlie. Man, you really just covered a whole lot of ground in a really short period of time. Your knowledge in this space is immense. It just through you're just so grounded in the basics of the business of it all. I feel like it to you it may seem natural, but I have a lot of people that come to me that a lot of this stuff is not obvious about sort of even branding or where to get started or what it actually costs or any of these kind of things. So I think you've shed a lot of light onto especially the whole how Hollywood plays a part in all this. It is interesting, and if you do know, I will like have one more question. What have you seen? What happens once, like from the, let's say on the Hollywood end? So when someone, whenever, if I were to option the rights to White Ash, what happens for me, the producer? What is it that I do that actually gets the film made? Do you know?
Well, so it depends on what you're trying to option and what you're trying to do, right? If you're looking to make a TV show, if you're looking to make a feature film, all of these are very different processes. But if you're a creator and someone comes to you and wants to option the rights to your work, you have to sort of look at, are you going to be part of that development? Are they looking to just option the rights and they're going to go off and do it on their own? If you're a producer and you find this comic book, you might be like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay you, and it's usually a smaller amount of money, anywhere from three to at the high end $12,000 for a period of time, and that's against a larger purchase price of the rights. And usually in that term, there's the ability to extend that term if you have other deals going. But once you acquire the rights to do things as a producer, then usually you have contacts that you're going to. If you were looking to make it as a feature film, right, and you're a producer and you have the rights, now what you're going to do is you're going to try to package it. You are going to find a director, maybe, who resonates with the material, or you're going to find a writer who can do a script take. And depending on how liquid you are, you're either going to pay the writer to do a take, a treatment, or draft, or that writer is going to come on board as a producer and they'll start doing those things pro bono because they're part of the package, and they'll get paid later on down the line. But what producers usually do at this point is they invest some seed capital, they start assembling the team, and they put together a package. And if it's for a feature film, it's probably a director and a actor, maybe a couple of actors, because the studios can run the calculations. They know how much each actor brings in. If it's the independent route, that producer is going to take that package and go to financiers and try to find, okay, I need to raise $10 million to make this version of the movie. And they'll crunch their numbers and they say, oh, you've got Scarlett Johansson. We'll give you $10 million for a film. So like that's one calculus. Or the producer takes the package around to the different studios and tries to pitch them, okay, I've got this team on this take on this book. And then once it gets set up at a place, then the development process starts happening where the studios bring their people in because they have mandates they want to work under. And they say, okay, we can only do films that sort of fit in this quadrant. We need to develop this property so it fits in this bucket because this is what we think we can sell right now. And so there's all these things that go into the creative development. If it's something that's going to be a TV series, then that's a slightly different process because what they'll do is they'll take the material and they'll probably pair it with a showrunner, who in a sense is a producer, and the showrunner will start developing their pitch. Most showrunners who are known quantities have relationships with networks or with studios, but then again, it's taken around as a package with a take and a material to the different streamers, to the networks, and everyone, if you're really lucky, there's a bidding war because 2 or 3 people want it. If you're not lucky at all, no one wants it. And they're like, okay, we paid you $3,000. Here's your stuff back. So like there's a lot of different things that can happen, but basically a producer is a person who is putting out some money, putting a team together, and trying to develop the material to a place that someone else wants to invest money in and make the thing. And then once it gets going, if that person's a creative producer, they'll be in on all the meetings, they'll be giving notes, they'll be like, okay, this cut, we need to get to the action faster, we need this actress, like, and so they actually function as an on-set producer, creative producer, helping shape the vision as the movie goes forward.
Brilliant. Well, thanks a lot, Charlie. Do you have anything else you want to get out there? Do you have a website or anything?
I mean, there's whiteashcomics.com, and if you go to the store there, it links to the current Kickstarter. You can find me on Twitter, or I guess I'm not even going to call the other name. I'm at Charles Stickney there. I also have at Charlie Stickney on Blue Sky, and those are the best places to find me for the moment. There's also White Ash Comics on Instagram, where I post pretty pictures that were drawn by people who are not me, and that's why they're pretty.
Gotcha. All right. That's a perfect place to wrap. And yeah, once again, thanks a lot. I love everything you've done. I just backed this newest one. I encourage other people to do the same, so and thanks for all your help in the past, obviously with my own books and my own
For
endeavors and
sure.
things like that. You are a great hand in this space, and we bow to you, sir.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
See ya.